All right, let's jump right into it. Welcome to this visual analysis of a topic that has absolutely dominated the headlines globally: Argentina's draft of the 2026 General Companies Law. Now, if you follow tech or finance, you've probably seen the wild rumors about a radical, almost sci-fi shift in corporate law. But how much of that is reality? Well, to figure that out, we're going to rely entirely on the phenomenal work of lawyer and researcher Gaston Rey. He has taken this draft law apart piece by piece, and his research is going to help us separate the myth from the actual legal innovation.
Listen to this quote because it sounds like it's straight out of a movie. The Argentine president himself wrote in the Financial Times about a, quote, non-human corporation operated by artificial intelligence agents in which human shareholders are optional. I mean, wow, right? It's exactly the kind of statement that makes global waves, conjuring up these crazy images of robots running boardrooms. But as we'll see through Ray's analysis, that political framing traveled way faster than the actual text of the law.
So to really unpack the work of researcher Gaston Rey, here is our roadmap. First, the AI myth. Then, the reality of the draft. Third, the true innovation. Fourth, the global perspective. And finally, who decides and who answers. Let's get started.
Starting right off with Part 1, El Mito de la IA, or the AI myth.
You know, there is just a massive gap here between the public rhetoric and the reality on paper. Lawyer Gaston Rey points out the stark contrast perfectly. On one side, we have this big talk of a non-human corporation where humans are optional. But the sobering reality? The text actually outlines a completely ordinary legal company that strictly mandates human anchors. In absolutely none of its operative provisions does this draft law constitute artificial intelligence as a legal subject. We're not creating some new species of legal person here. It's simply regulating how a company operates, not the nature of who is operating it.
Which brings us to Part 2, La Realidad del Proyecto, the actual reality of the draft.
When we dig into the cold hard text, Ray's analysis is super revealing. Article 1 still classically defines a company as the undertaking of one or more persons. Then you've got Article 3 declaring the entity is an ordinary legal person, explicitly subject to veil piercing if someone abuses the corporate form. And Article 14 is the big one. It defines the automated company. But here's the kicker. It doesn't create a new type of legal subject at all. It literally just states that a company using autonomous algorithms for its everyday operations still answers with its own patrimony. The primary liability stays completely corporate and patrimonial, exactly as it always has.
And honestly, this is where the grand irony of the whole project really hits. Take the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Operative Company. This is supposed to be the most autonomous, hands-off figure in the entire law. Yet, as Ray highlights, it is the one most densely tied down to actual human beings. It mandates a human legal representative. It requires a human promoter with unlimited joint liability. And if anti-money laundering rules apply, you guessed it, a human compliance officer is required. The quote-unquote non-human corporation actually sits on a very solid human foundation.
So let's move to Part 3, La Verdadera Innovación, the true innovation here.
Okay, so if we aren't creating literal robot CEOs, what is the actual breakthrough? Well, lawyer and researcher Gaston Rey identifies the real plot twist here, calling it the dissociation thesis. The genuine novelty isn't ontological. We aren't witnessing the birth of a legal robot. The innovation is architectural. The law introduces this totally unprecedented structural fragmentation of three key elements in corporate law: decision, legal personhood, and imputation, which is basically the assignment of liability.
Think of classic corporate law as a perfectly aligned triangle. The physical person who decides, like a director, aligns with the legal person they're deciding for, and that aligns with who is held liable. The director deliberates, the company acts, and liability follows. But Ray explains that this new law completely shatters that triangle. The actual decision-making migrates over to an autonomous system or algorithm. The legal personhood stays anchored to the company, and the imputation, the ultimate liability, still falls on a human being. Those three dimensions just don't line up anymore.
And this creates a really profound structural anomaly, particularly in Article 102. It states that using AI preserves the liability of directors, keeping them on the hook to configure and supervise the system. But the anomaly is that the human is kept around not as the actual author of the conduct, but basically as a legal mailing address. They are just there to receive liability for an algorithmic decision, a decision that doesn't actually have a human author. It's liability for a system's outcome, mediated by the director's fault in designing or supervising it. So a human is answering for a process they no longer completely control.
Let's zoom out a bit for Part 4, Law Perspectiva Global. How does this fit into the rest of the world?
As lawyer Gaston Rey notes, the Argentine proposal really isn't as unprecedented or risky as the marketing suggests. Back in 2017, the European Union considered and then firmly rejected the idea of an electronic person because experts warned it would totally dilute accountability. In the U.S., specifically Wyoming, courts in cases like Sarkoony versus BZX DAO have treated DAOs as general partnerships, meaning human token holders are personally liable. And, despite all its sci-fi rhetoric, Argentina is doing the exact same thing, rejecting AI personhood and relying heavily on human anchors. Basically, legal systems all over the globe are converging on one common solution. Algorithmic governance, yes, but absolutely no algorithmic personhood.
And that leads us right into our final section, Part 5, ¿Quién decide, quién responde? Who decides and who actually answers?
Ray points out a brilliant ideological tension here. The current Argentine government is a big subscriber to the Austrian School of Economics. Their main pillar? Methodological individualism, the idea that only individuals act and collective entities are just conceptual shortcuts. So it is incredibly ironic that this same government is rhetorically claiming to have created a non-human entity that acts without persons. But impartially speaking, when you look at the actual text forcing a human to answer for the system, the law itself is actually far more faithful to their individualist philosophy than those sensational headlines.
So why does the law do this? It comes down to something called the constitutive third. Basically, legal personhood isn't something you just have in isolation. It's a status you get because you can answer to a third party, the legal order. An algorithm just can't do that. It can't walk into a courtroom and answer for its actions. And that is exactly why the law is forced to keep a human being at the top of the responsibility chain. The legal system isn't going to try and subpoena code. It keeps a human there because at the end of the day, someone has to answer.
And so we arrive at our conclusion. This draft law doesn't create corporate robots. Instead, as Gaston Rey's research shows, it creates a fractured architecture where the algorithm decides, the corporation owns, and the human answers. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As the gap widens between the computing system making the decisions and the human being legally forced to step up and take the blame, who is really being protected here? Is the human still the conductor of the orchestra, or have we simply become legal shields for systems we no longer entirely understand? Thanks for joining this visual analysis, and remember to always keep questioning the reality behind the headlines.